The PS5 is on the horizon and it's already boasting plenty of cool capabilities.
Does that mean full backwards compatibility?
Does that mean awesome streaming?
So many questions!
Hot take! So many questions, eh?
Yeah.
A patent surfaced a while ago that we had spoken about. Mark Cerny had actually made this patent. It was Mark Cerny, of course, we have to mention this every time, is the architect for the PlayStation 4 and also the upcoming PlayStation 5. He made this patent that was basically showing backwards compatibility in some form. It was kind of a flowchart.
Yeah. And he also made Marble Madness. Everyone forgets that.
We always say that.
It's important.
And Knack. Anyway,
yeah.
So, yes, can you explain this patent a little bit more? What did this patent do?
Basically, what the patent is talking about is giving the ability for the PlayStation 5 the ability to play older video game systems, but in a way that hasn't really been done traditionally on systems prior to it. Right now, with the Xbox One, you have the ability to emulate older games, but it's really emulating them. It's not like running an Xbox inside of it or anything. The PlayStation 3, prior to its removal of PlayStation 2 abilities, had a little PlayStation 2 inside of it, and then it originally had like a chip that just emulated. It was a little bit weird. But what the PlayStation 5 is aiming to do, according to the patent, which is all hearsay and theory and concept, is that when you put a disc into the PlayStation, or the PlayStation 5, whatever the disc is, whether it be PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, it would basically tell the system, okay, turn into this, and it would treat that, it would basically create a software-hardware variation of that hardware so that the game would run just like it's supposed to run on the original hardware.
The game's like, oh, I'm a PlayStation 2 game, what are you? And then the PlayStation 5's like, a PlayStation 2? And then the game runs. So I guess, yeah. So that patent came out and a lot of people were like, great, okay, we're going to see legacy software coming to the PlayStation 5. We didn't really know the form factor of it. And other things start to bubble up. So since then, we've had some confirmation about backwards compatibility from Sony themselves, who have said, this is a direct quote from Sony, currently the dev team is putting all power on verifying whether they can secure a complete compatibility with the PlayStation 4. Now that's not, of course, everything. That's just this current gen being brought over to the next gen. But that's something, right?
Yes.
So still, there's something going on with backwards compatibility. Well, Shane, my friend, the plot thickens. So recently, Patrick Klepek of Vice Gaming, he did a podcast, and he was talking about some of the things that he's been seeing and hearing about the upcoming PlayStation 5. He said, everything I've heard about the PS5, this is going back 2 full years now, has been a huge emphasis on history, and that it's going to be the sort of thing where it's not just about the future of gaming, but also about the past. So that means your ability to play a lot of those games, a lot of those older games. Whatever. That's just a little bit of, they're going to embrace their history. Maybe it's just going to be the PlayStation Now service is a little thicker.
I think it's about this, though. I think it's about getting those old games running on the PlayStation 5.
Okay, well, there's a little more to this, okay? Right. So a Twitter user by the name of PS Erebus.
I'm going to say PS Rebus.
PSE Rebus? Okay, yes. Well, this is a PS insider who has leaked some information that has actually come to fruition, and that was The Last of Us 2's release date. And they've had other information as well. So this is a pretty good person as far as PlayStation news is concerned.
Could also mean he just works at GameStop, but you never know.
Yes, that's very true. So this person tweeted, "Do not dispose of, trade, or sell your PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, or PlayStation 4 games."
Complete with the registered trademark and all.
Registered trademark and all. So why? Why shouldn't we get rid of our physical games?
Do you know why, Adam?
Why is that, Shane? Why?
It's because soon we'll be able to play all of our old discs again, like the new. That's pretty much it.
Exactly, Shane. This is not quite confirmation that the PlayStation 5 will be fully backwards compatible, but I guess what we're getting at with all this information overload right now is that a lot of things are pointing to backwards compatibility. We don't know what exactly the state of that backwards compatibility may be. In my mind, the best case scenario is kind of what we just read from PSE Ribus, the PS leaker, who's basically saying you can physically take your games off your shelves. So for people who collect games like I do, you have your PlayStation 1 games and 2 games, and you pop them right into your PlayStation 5, and they run very well.
Yes.
So do you expect this?
Honestly, I think it's I am 99% sure this is going to happen. It makes too much sense. With the PlayStation 4, Sony left money on the table. In fact, I think they pretty much burnt the table because the concept was that when you get the PlayStation 4, no old games are going to work on the PlayStation 4, which is a nightmare scenario for Sony because they've created a lot of really good games in the past decades. So, the PlayStation 1, there is no way to play PlayStation 1 games on PlayStation 4. Unless you're playing that one part in Uncharted 4 that gives you just a couple seconds of playing Crash Bandicoot.
You can play one stage of Crash Bandicoot unless you get the
So you can
remaster.
do that, yeah. But that's not the point. The idea is that you just can't play PlayStation 1 games. Even with PlayStation Now, which we'll talk a little bit about later, PlayStation Now has PlayStation 2 games on there, which you can also download, and you can buy them from the storefront. But those PlayStation 2 games are actually PlayStation 2 games that have been modified slightly.
Yeah.
Yeah, they've been either widescreenized, I don't know what you call that, aspect ratio changed.
Yes.
They've also aspect ratio corrected. That's the name. They've also upped the resolution and stuff like that. So things have changed them. They're not the original games.
They look pretty.
Yes.
But
when it comes to PlayStation 3,
yeah.
You can stream them on PlayStation Now, but you can't download those games because the PlayStation 4 is apparently not powerful enough to run cell processor games, which if you don't know what the PlayStation 3 was based off of, it was created using cell processing technologies, which also was used in a fridge once. Wasn't a great idea. Just saying that now.
So basically what we're getting at right now is the PlayStation 4 has had some weird sort of, not really backwards compatibility, but it just had weird ways of playing these games.
Yes.
And out of the legacy that is the PlayStation brand, we've always had kind of a look back with the consoles ever since the PlayStation 2, the PlayStation 3, and the PlayStation 4 was a bit of a stopgap for them. Now we're seeing a lot of things coming, they're just becoming more popular within the gaming mainstream. So not only do we have Xbox, touting its sort of backwards compatibility, which it wasn't supposed to at the very beginning, but they're like, okay, that's one thing we can have to one-up the competition. But we're also seeing devices like the classic systems, and Analog is coming in with some devices that show, look, people want to play old games and they want to relive these classics, and that's really important. So I think there's a couple of reasons why PlayStation would be taking this so very seriously with their next iteration of consoles.
Oh yeah. So Adam, there are a couple games on the PlayStation 1 that are pretty expensive. Can you think of one Tron Bond type style game of some sort?
Tron Bond style. There's only one Tron Bond style game, and that's
what is the name?
Yeah, Tron Bond.
The Misadventures of Tron Bond. How much is that game, Adam?
Oh, well, okay. I haven't checked recently, but usually around $300-ish. I'm Canadian also, so that might be all over the place.
Whatever.
But
it's expensive.
Yeah, and there's other amazing PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2 games. Rule of Rose, if you want to play on the PlayStation 2, super expensive. The Haunting Grounds. Suikoden 2 is very expensive. So many expensive games.
Expensive. If you want to find them, they become incredibly rare and hard to pick up. Sony sees people spending hundreds of dollars on a single copy of a game, and they're like, how come we're not making any of that cash? So what they want to do is they want to get all of those old games just running on the PlayStation 5 effortlessly. You see, before, with the past generation, with this current generation, we're seeing a lot of companies remaster games, recreate games, rebuild games. Some of them are done pretty cheaply, but also a lot of that ends up being pretty expensive and time-consuming. So the concept that Mark threw out there with his wonderful little
Mark Cerny, of course, creator of Knack.
Yes, creator of Knack.
Okay.
What he did with his little patent was basically say, okay, what if we just tell the PlayStation 5 to become these systems whenever we put in a disc? Therefore, it runs the games like it's supposed to originally, so we don't have to touch anything. That way, we can just basically release ISOs and ROMs of all these games and just have them running like they're originally supposed to run. But there could be more to that. I'm not just thinking PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm also thinking PSP, PlayStation Vita.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful?
Those are really not, like those games, PSP has a wonderful library that people skip out on all the time.
We would be losing sort of the physical media approach to the PlayStation 5 with those systems. We're never going to see a Vita card slot on a PS5. I can never see that. And of course,
or the
UMD. No. But
that's not gonna happen.
Here's something that I'm kind of thinking about, Shane. Sort of an integration integration of both digital and physical. Maybe this is the approach they'll take. Okay, so let's say I have Tron Bonne. I don't have Tron. I have Suikoden 2. Okay, that's an expensive game.
All right.
I put it in, I'm playing it, I'm like, great, I can finally play this on a new Sony system, and it looks great, and I'm playing it, and you come over, and you're like, hey, what are you playing? I'm like, Suikoden 2. And you're like, whoa, dude, I want that. And I'm like, well, it's pretty expensive if you want it physically, and then maybe Sony knows about this, and they're like, well,
You can buy a digital
let's
copy.
offer these things digitally so that, a lot of people are enjoying the classic games that they have on their shelves, and then the folks around them, it's kind of a word of mouth thing where you want to jump on board, go get Tron Bonne on the digital store or other titles. And
best of both worlds. See what we're talking about here? See, people that are collecting their old video games and they're making lots of money from the increased value, that's going to keep on happening, and more people are going to be able to play those. If anything, the actual value of those games may increase because more people will be able to play those games on their current system. Now, likely we're not going to see this happen with the PSP or the PS Vita, but why bother stopping at just Sony games? We could probably get Sega CD, maybe Saturn, whatever. I mean, it's all out there, right?
You always got a crowbar Snatcher and everything.
It could be any way to play Snatcher, I'm telling you. But PlayStation 1 games need to come back. Right now,
Absolutely.
If you've been out there paying attention to what's the words in the wind, right now a lot of people are talking about libraries, content ownership, content creation being the primary factor for any of these systems to exist. Right now, there's a whole bunch of fights with Netflix and Disney Plus and Amazon Video. They're all trying to get the most content they possibly can to get people onto their services. If for whatever reason the next generation of consoles really starts to tune down the idea of owning a console and gets more into streaming, we're going to talk about that later. There's that idea. There's a lot of people there that are assuming that it's going to be the library, the content that keeps people coming back. Sony is one of the few companies that has a ton of games. They've survived very, very long. We've got Sega, Nintendo, and Sony. That's pretty much it. Everyone else that's been making video game systems and other kinds of platforms haven't made enough to make large libraries, or they're just publishers and have a huge library across multiple systems. But when it comes to Sony, they own specifically the content on those systems, so they could bring a huge library there that even Microsoft couldn't compete with.
And I would love to see the library much more expand from what we're seeing right now with their PlayStation Now sort of offerings. So we talked a little bit about the past, and we talked about some patents. We wanted to kind of toss something else into the conversation today because something else came up just recently. We have to talk about the future. Future.
Throw up the patent.
Yes. Okay, so this patent that just sort of surfaced recently
is a bunch of people in an art museum.
Okay, so this patent looks bizarre, and it kind of looks like how a child would show you how the internet works or something.
Yes.
It's like internet cloud gaming. This is thing, but there are far more images to this and far more descriptions that go into this patent. This patent is for a controller we're to assume is for the PlayStation 5. It's for cloud gaming, and according to the patent and from Sony, the patent is for input latency. It's so that input latency can be reduced by allowing the controller to send inputs directly over the network to the cloud gaming server, bypassing the client device.
So what is this?
Yes.
This is Stadia. That's exactly what Stadia is trying to do.
Yes.
Their controller doesn't connect directly to your system. It connects to the internet. That's the whole concept of their controller. So why would Sony be wanting to make something like this?
Because Stadia. Okay.
That's pretty much it. No, it's because Stadia. That's true. Yeah.
Patents are a dime a dozen, right?
True.
Hey, we were just talking about a patent a moment ago that Mark Cerny had made that for the backwards compatibility aspect of the PlayStation 5. That might not even be a thing.
Yes.
Right? The way that backwards compatibility on the PlayStation 5 works might not have anything to do with that. Patents just kind of happen. Yep. But a lot of the times patents are made to basically get your foot in the door towards a certain technology. And that's kind of what this feels like. Everyone is talking about cloud gaming right now.
That's
Stadia is launching next month. We have xCloud?
xCloud.
Project xCloud from Xbox. Everyone wants to get their foot into the cloud gaming door right now. And this is it. This is the patent for it.
That's pretty much it.
It's basically saying that this controller will make it so that you do not need a PlayStation device to do whatever the heck it is they want to do. We don't know if this means the entirety of the PlayStation 5 ecosystem is accessible on your TV. We don't know that only just a sample of what you could do is on there. We don't know anything about this. It is only a patent to connect to probably to some service.
That's what we assume. With the PlayStation Now service, if you had a controller that connected directly to the server, likely you would have some reduction in latency. Honestly, we haven't seen this in practice yet, so it's a lot of hearsay. But
yeah, Stadia's been talking a lot about this.
Logically, this makes sense. You still have the server issue somewhere else. There's going to still be problems, but if this helps mitigate it or just lessens it just a little bit, that might really help. We've played PlayStation Now on a couple of platforms. It sucks, I think.
Not so good.
Yeah, there's some good stuff about it, some good stuff that isn't so good.
The good stuff about it is the stuff that isn't streaming, in my opinion. The good stuff about it is when you can actually download those titles to your system.
Because you're getting a one-to-one response.
Exactly, and play those games. So
with the PlayStation Now service as it stands right now, I've run it on a system. I've run it on an internet connection that's 1,000 up and 1,000 down.
Whoa.
It's really fast everywhere you go, and it was not running PlayStation Now properly. It really hurt. Like, I know some of those games quite well, and to play them on that platform, I would consider them unplayable.
Yeah.
So it's one of those issues. But if you have this controller, suddenly you don't have to worry about that. But see, the whole idea of this controller is to be like, look, maybe you don't want to buy the PlayStation 5. Maybe you don't want to buy a PlayStation 4 or even a 1 or a 2. What if you can just get the games on the streaming service, you have this controller, and it's automatically connecting to your TV? Because you got to think about this, folks. What company out there makes TVs? Sony. If Sony just started selling TVs with the controller bundled in that does all this stuff, or even if they sold the controller as a secondary edition, suddenly you have a TV that just plays PlayStation games streaming, and you don't have to worry about anything.
That would be a brilliant idea if they just gave away the controller with the TV itself. Like,
why not?
It probably would cost them next to nothing if they're producing it themselves.
Yeah.
Sounds like a really smart idea.
Also, Sony traditionally charges way too much for their TVs, so there's a lot of breathing room in there.
Sony TVs aren't quite what they used to be.
No. Sony TVs way back in like the 90s and the 80s, they had a standard. There was something about them that was really good, but as time has gone on, the panels that they use are actually from like other companies like LG or something. They just put their own like processor chip on it and stuff like that. Regardless, they're putting a lot of a price on top of those. I've been to the store and I've seen some of their TVs and I'm just like, wow, I could buy a car or a TV. What should I choose? So they could be throwing in some controllers in there and just giving it away.
Anyway, regardless of all this Sony TV stuff, I still think it would be a brilliant idea to have the controller there. But basically what I think this patent is just sort of an insurance policy for the future. Right now, a lot of people, if you have this conversation about Stadia or cloud game streaming, the thing that always comes up is my internet can't do that. My internet can't do that. There are, like the Switch, for example, they were trying out a few games in Japan. They tried out Resident Evil 7 and Assassin's Creed Odyssey, I believe, and that seemed to go fairly well. The better infrastructure there.
Yeah, I think Japan's way better for this stuff, folks.
I think these companies are looking at other countries that have far better infrastructure and kind of thinking about, well, what's going to happen 5 years from now? They always have to be a few steps ahead of current tech and kind of seeing where things are going. This is an insurance policy so that when the infrastructure is there for a streaming service that works, hey, maybe Stadia works out of the gate. And Sony's like, oh, that's how you did it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, then they can get on board and they have these patents ready. Get the ball rolling.
In my mind with the PlayStation 5, what's being proposed here, and like I said, I'm like nearly 100% certain that this thing is going to come out with this backwards compatibility in mind. I believe that the full idea is that PlayStation Now is going to basically continue the way it is, but if you have a PlayStation 5, you can download every single game as an ISO or a file directly to your system so that you can play it. It's going to make a big difference. Look, when Sony and all those companies can save money by not having to reconfigure the games or do anything, they just provide the ISO, all that time, all that energy, it goes into the licensing of things. It goes into all that stuff, and they can just make their library bigger and bigger and bigger.
And if they're not necessarily 100% focusing on streaming, there's a lot of cost associated with that technology. Like I said, right now, it's still in its sort of like childish phase. You know what I'm talking about. So yeah,
adolescent phase.
In my perfect world, you'd be able to download the ISOs, or I just like collecting games. I want physical backwards compatibility. At the end of the day, all we can talk about streaming and magic controllers and cool things and stuff. The thing that interests me the most about this whole conversation is that one Twitter user talking about being able to take your games off the shelf, put them in your PlayStation, and playing them gloriously on your HD TVs. Hopefully they look beautiful.
I think it's important. The next generation of consoles, whether you're aware of it or not, is going to be a massive fight for digital ownership, for ownership of physical, digital. It's going to be crazy.
That's the war.
We've never been in anything like this before, so it's going to be a big deal where every company is throwing in whatever they can. You're seeing alliances being drawn. There was this idea of, you know how we've dealt with the longest time of Microsoft as a camp, Nintendo as a camp, Sony as a camp, Google now has a camp. Well, now the camp lines are being rubbed away because with Xbox, they're working with Sony on the xCloud platform. Now, PlayStation Now doesn't use it right now, but in the future, things might change. Things are drastically changing, and when that happens, bigger events are going to happen. If you're selling a box that plays discs, it is in your best interest to make sure that box plays as many discs as possible. So having the legacy of old Sony games working on their latest system makes a lot of sense when you consider that. And I think a lot of people out there would be huge fans. What if you just heard, oh, I'm a huge fan of PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 games, and you're telling me this new this new PlayStation 5 that's coming out plays my original games and all those games will work again? Because remember, the PlayStation 2, not an HDMI-based system. Only the PlayStation 3 was the first time they did that. So a lot of people out there need those games to look better and perform better on their new systems.
You're bringing up a pretty good point. There's people out there that may be like, I have dozens of PlayStation 2 games, but you know what? I got out of gaming after that. And then someone's like, oh no, the PlayStation 5 can play those games. How likely are they to be on board with newer titles that are going to be released on that platform and to jump into other services? Sony must be thinking about this. Get those other folks. Get the folks that aren't gaming. You know, let's make the audience even bigger.
In my opinion, the way I see this working out for Sony is, and there's going to be a little bit of a movie bit of a positioning for them as well. Sony owns, is at least partial ownership of Blu-ray, as many people know out there. There's the new Blu-ray 4K discs, and there's a whole rush to get to 4K stuff. There are a lot of issues with streaming platforms spreading out. Like I said, remember how Netflix was usually the only streaming platform out there? Now everyone's going sideways and all over the place.
Yeah.
So now you can't just get one streaming platform to get what you want. So if you offered a box that played DVD movies, Blu-ray movies, and 4K movies, it's the same philosophy as PlayStation games. You can't get these PlayStation games anywhere. So if you can have some way to get the physical copy of them to run, suddenly you got a box that plays everything. Microsoft likely isn't going to, they're doing backwards compatibility pretty well with the Xbox One X, but it is not running the games off the disc. They have to work on that stuff. And whenever there's a game that's introduced to the Xbox One ecosystem that's originally from the original Xbox, that game has to be converted on Microsoft's side, and when you put the disc in, it downloads a file. Sony doesn't want to deal with that. They just want everything to work. So that's where I think they're really playing here. They're trying to make something that a lot of people are going to be super excited about that likely haven't been excited about video games in a while. So maybe that's what this is.
Absolutely. Well, what do you guys think? Do you think they're going to support their legacy? Do you expect to see everything from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 4 being compatible on the PlayStation 5? And are you like me? Do you want to see the actual physical discs being capable of being read by this new, special, fangled, wonderful machine?
Or are you thinking that this whole thing is a wash and you're only going to get the PlayStation 5 to play PlayStation 5 games?
Oh, or maybe to stream. Possibly to stream. Let us know what you think in the comments below.